I was a sophomore in high school. I remember hearing a shrieking in the hallway of my high school. I saw a woman running down the hall. My teacher ran into the hallway to see what was wrong. Moments later, she ran back inside the classroom and she turned the television on, just in time for us to see the second plane hit the towers. I was terrified. I remember feeling a million emotions all at once. I was sad, I was angry. I had no frame of reference for what was going on. What I didn't know at the time was that that moment in those attacks would be a very significant turning point in my life. I have always tried to speak very openly and honestly about my experiences in the military, about the topics that mean the most to me, like post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injuries, the transition process. These speeches and discussions never came easily to me, but my need to help others was stronger than my need to stay silent. There was a talk earlier this year, a TED Talk, from Sebastian Junger, who was a journalist, and he spent several months with soldiers in the Korengal Valley in Afghanistan, where they saw some of the fiercest fighting of the wars. He talks about a general belief that any sane person would hate war, and there's truth to this belief. Any sane person would hate killing, violence, bloodshed. Understandably, they would hate the hate that can fuel and drive these conflicts. So, what does it say about somebody who misses war, considering all that it entails? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would like to share my story with you. Growing up in small-town New Hampshire, I didn't know the evil that existed in the world. I was very blessed, some may say, to be sheltered in that way. When the terrorist attacks occurred, I spent months, years, watching the news, getting my hands on every newspaper I could. I cut out articles from all of these newspapers. I made scrapbooks. I still look at them. I couldn't accept that single acts could change our global society the way that they did, that they could change my society, that they could change me. And I couldn't let it go. And I still can't let it go. I knew that I needed to act, that I needed to do something. And my action was joining the United States Army years before I could drink a beer, before I could vote, before I could go to college. I was 17 years old. I took an oath to protect and defend my country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I went to basic training in between my junior and my senior year of high school. I had initially signed for an analyst position in intelligence, and I was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to wait on my top secret security clearance to process. And while I was there, I got antsy. The top secret clearances take many months to finalize. And while I was there in reception, hanging around, there was a buzz in the air. It was palpable. There was this burning need to serve in combat. In 2004, there was excitement, and I desperately wanted to be a part of that. In high school, I felt like I never really belonged. I had friends, some good friends, but I still felt like an outsider. I felt like a loner. In the Army, I never once felt alone. It was like I had joined a sorority or a fraternity of sorts, but one where we cuss and drink beer and fight wars. In truth, everybody that knew me early in high school thought that I would go on to college and that I would join a real sorority, and I thought that too. And after the terrorist attacks occurred, I knew that I had a very different path ahead of me. A few short months later, I found myself in Kuwait. I was on a secret late-night mission. It was my first mission in the Middle East. I was very excited. It was a secret mission to get metal, scrap metal, from a community trash pit for our mechanics to weld onto our trucks. And you can see the metal in those trucks. And my anxiousness to find out what this war thing was all about, I turned down my intelligence analyst position for a transportation officer, for a truck driver. The trucks that we brought over with us to the Middle East, many of them were missing doors. A lot of them were missing roofs. Most of them didn't have windows. We were about to roll into Iraq in less than 48 hours in trucks that had no protection. I had no idea at the time that everything about my life and that everything about me was about to change so drastically. Nobody in their right mind wanted to be within a 50-mile radius of us when we rolled out of the wire at the FOB, or the forward operating base, which we did every single day. We were hauling fuel and ammunition and hazardous material. Everything that we hauled was combustible. We were a time bomb on wheels. And it wasn't a matter of if we would get hit by RPGs, by improvised explosive devices. It was only a matter of when and how bad. I was 19 years old. Everything that I thought I knew about love, about war, about humanity was challenged, deconstructed, and in many ways destroyed completely. It was challenged on late-night missions when I was running on 2 or 3 hours of sleep in the last 3 days, with very little water, with very little food, when it didn't make physiological sense that I could even be awake, never mind operating heavy machinery on the most dangerous roads in the world. All of our missions took place at night, when it was relatively safer. And when we would come home in the morning and we called it home, I would fall asleep with my M16 cradled in my arms and my head up against the buttstock. It was a source of comfort for me. I lost 2 friends on Veterans Day 2005, one early morning, on a convoy in northern Iraq. I saluted their caskets as they were loaded onto planes to go back home to Washington and to Puerto Rico. I attended a memorial service while deployed for a service member killed in action almost every other week, it seemed like, whether I knew them or not. But in many ways, I did know them. And now I knew war. I got everything that I possibly could have wanted, and then so much more than I thought I could take. To miss something that society despises so much is deeply unsettling. It's even more unsettling to admit it. When asked what everything is, I don't have an answer. I don't speak for all veterans, and what I'm saying may only resonate with a few. But I can say this with absolute certainty. What I miss most about war is simplicity. I miss the feeling of belonging. I see my fellow warfighters today in college students struggling to create a new life, new opportunities for themselves and for their families. I see them in patients in VA waiting rooms trying to get their meds adjusted. I see them in my friends who talk about things like addiction and nightmares, failed marriages. Many of them are very successful and driven simply because living a mundane life is too much for them to bear. And most of them, the majority of them, don't talk about things that are so upsetting or dramatic. They simply talk about being alone. Let me be very clear about this. There is nothing that I miss about death. But war was the one place where I felt like I truly belonged, where I knew that I could trust people with my life. I believe that it is less about death and easing suffering and more about the loss of connections that lead my brothers and sisters to commit suicide. Every day, there are 22 veterans committing suicide. Every day. It's completely unacceptable. That's more than double the civilian suicide rate, and that's only what is reported. The number is projected to be much higher and is only increasing over time. I was so disturbed by this number, the fact that people that I knew, my friends, my brothers, my sisters, were committing suicide, and I couldn't accept it, and I knew what I believed to be the truth about these wars, but I wanted to hear it from them. So I conducted a research study, and I asked them, which sometimes is all we have to do is ask. And I asked them, if you could tell people anything, if you could tell them what it was like for you to transition from combat to civilian life, what would you want them to know? And here are some of their answers in their own words. I was 20 years old. It was raining the night that we flew into McChord Air Force Base from Iraq. There was a quick drive back to Fort Lewis. There was an even quicker welcome home ceremony in a gymnasium that felt very awkward and forced. And then before I knew it, I was back home in my barracks room. And I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked around. For a good hour, I sat there, feeling lost. And I got up from my bed, and I went into the shower, and I collapsed, and I tried to wash away all of it. I tried to wash away an entire year of war. With veteran suicide rates at an all-time high, it is imperative that we work at reestablishing the connections that many feel like they have lost. Home for us may not feel like home, or at least the one that we left behind, but we will always have a home with each other. Today, I'm 29 years old. I have a beautiful 6-year-old daughter who I've raised by myself. I have a job that I love that lets me work with veterans and for veterans every single day. If I can give any advice to my newly enlisted 17-year-old self, it would be to do it all over again, despite everything. To face fear, to get intimately acquainted with life and with death, to overcome these huge obstacles so that one day I may help others do the same. And if I can offer you any advice today, it's to let the veterans in your lives tell their story, or not. It took me almost a decade to tell mine. As hard as these stories may be, they're stories that must be told. For our sake, for our nation's sake, these stories must be told. Please listen.